Welcome to Shorty's SuperCoach. How are we, guys? What's going on? We've got a bit of a double video Sunday. Shorty's filming twice in the day. It's been a pretty quiet day, I must admit. Just had the cricket on. Hectic match. Tomorrow's set up beautifully. Obviously, I'll post this later, so it's totally irrelevant, but absolute collapse by the Aussies today. And then a mini fight back from the tail enders. So I will again be placing myself on the couch tomorrow, watching day 5. Hoping we run through the Indians with 10 wickets and get a 2-1 lead. But going to have a look at a bit of a tier list today with the forwards. Premium forwards, just like we did the defenders. But as you'll see, I've got a couple of guys that maybe aren't priced as premiums, but the likes of Brent Daniels, Jack McCrae, a few others are worth considering and putting in this mould. Slightly different tiers to the midfielders, because obviously we've got different standards and expectations for our scorers in the forward line. But we'll go through those in a moment. But I did want to share a bit of a story with you the other day. I shared it on TikTok for those that follow me on there too, but had a bit of a howler in the kitchen. Now, I'm on holidays, so I thought, let's try and do a bit of cooking. You don't cook much. You're often feeling a bit strapped for time. Let's do something. So, Shorty delved into the slow cooker, put together a bit of a spaghetti meatball operation. And we made quite a few, put a few in the slow cooker, and froze a few that needed to be cooked. So I had a few in the freezer, put them in the fridge just to defrost. Got stuck in them the other day. Now, I remember thinking at the time, texture's a bit funny, it's a bit weird. Certainly didn't feel that good of the night. I just thought, maybe they didn't freeze too well. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it just hasn't come across too nicely after it's defrosted. I don't know. Didn't think much of it, but that night I was feeling, a bit nauseous, sick in the stomach. It was a bit hard to get to sleep. I was like, what's going on here? Feeling fine the next day. Just didn't think too much of it. Anyway, today, my sister was like, oh, what are these in the fridge? These were the meatballs that I had the other day. I'm like, oh, the meatballs are made. She's like, oh, what are you going to chuck them in the air fryer or something? And I'm like, oh, and that's when it dawned on me. I was like, air fryer? No, they're cooked. And I was like, hang on a minute. You'd already eaten the cooked ones. These were part of the second batch that were frozen fresh. And all you did the other day, mate, was chuck them in the microwave for about a minute and a half to heat them up. Ladies and gentlemen, Shorty just ate 3 raw meatballs, just pure minced meat, just like a fucking savage, like an animal. No wonder I wasn't feeling too great that night. And it was so weird. Now that I think about it, they were pretty soft. I remember feeling like the texture was a bit off. What are you doing, mate? What are you doing? You didn't even cook them. What is going on? So I've had a bit of a shocker there. I'm not really sure. I've told this story to a few people. It's hard to suggest as to how I got myself into that predicament. But I was just cruising on holidays, mate. Just vibing. And eating raw meat. Thank God it wasn't chicken. But let's get stuck into some SuperCoach content, shall we? And let's have a look at these forwards. And I think last year the forward line was a disaster for us, but this year I feel like it's been the line that I've changed the least in my team pick. I'm feeling really confident with it. So we'll go through a few names. And the first name is a really interesting one, Liam Baker. Now, of course, he finds himself at the Eagles now, former Tiger, and he's played a bit all over the place as a Tiger, pretty successfully too. Like, he's had some great football on a half-forward flank, through the midfield, and in the defensive line as well. All in all, it's never really equated to great year-on-year averages, but we have seen within seasons, some really handy scores. But more or less, he's been just super consistent between 78 and 83. The talk is that he's moving a half back, and how that will look, I'm very, very interested to see. He's at about 480k, and the thing is, it's all down to position for this one, because if he's not playing half back, he's a thanks but no thanks, mate. We're not touching that. But it is really looking like he will play off half back, and if he is a distributor, because they've lost a couple of guys. I think, Hearn's retired, and even someone like Barras used to get involved, not so much distributing, but he would be involved in that kick mark play and have some really big mark tallies. I am going to put him in the 90 to 94. Now, it's all role dependent, but I think if everything we're hearing is true, and normally when players go to new clubs, they go for opportunity and there's a clear set idea for him. I don't know why he would play forward at the Eagles. It doesn't seem to make any sense. It seems like it would be midfield or backline. Their midfield is actually, starting to beef up with a mixture of experience and youth coming through. Seems like half-back is where he's been pinned to, and it makes sense. So I'm going to chuck him there, but I'm super interested to see how it does pan out for him throughout the pre-season. And another very interesting one is Shai Bolton. So he's a guy that has also gone across from the Tigers to WA, except at Fremantle. Now, he's a player that has been frustrating over the journey and probably hasn't quite reached the heights that I feel like many thought he would. He's definitely had some really good years and really good games. But I remember sort of thinking around this 2020 mark that he was just going to destroy the comp, go nuts. But aside from this 2023 year where he did average 96, and that's a great average, he hasn't really torn a competition apart consistently. He's had runs of it. I think he's going to have a career best year. New club, a winning club. Maybe it's simplistic, but he's the type of player to me that goes a bit better in a team that's going well. And I just think he's slightly more outside. He's a beautiful finisher. And I just think at times he looked a little bit checked out in a really difficult year for the Tigers. Richmond was struggling. He was struggling. I think at the Dockers they're going to win a lot more games than the Tigers will. And I'm seeing his average come back up. So for me, honestly, I was half tempted with a 95 to 99. I think it belongs in the 90 to 94. But then again, he's done it before. I'm just interested to see stuff it. I'm putting him up here. I reckon he'll get back to those feats at 23. About a 96, 97 type of average. Because I think he will get time in the middle to burst out and be part of the clearance. But he'll also cause absolute havoc in a Fremantle forward line that does need a player like him. So I'm really in between. Look, if you gave me an over and unders market, you'd put it right at 95. I reckon he's either going to be just above 95 or just below. Honestly, if it fits into your structure, you get him at a pretty good price. He's pretty cheap. For me, he's not one that I've considered much. Certainly, like I said, there's a lot of other options I like a lot more. But he's not one that I've totally disregarded either. He is a watch for mine. Be interested to see how he goes at his new club. Next up is Jeremy Cameron. And as much as I love Jezza, he's been one of those guys that we've just thought was going to be SuperCoach relevant. Every single time he does tease to be SuperCoach relevant, he finds a way to do something that just has us tearing our hair out. He's averaged 91. He's averaged some good numbers. Even last year was a solid average at times. But it is a roller coaster. And he is a key forward, so it makes sense. I think with Jezza, what we like is that he is a bit more mobile and gets up the ground and can have these games where he's 27 and kicks a couple. It somehow only scored 101. But he can win more of the footy than, say, a Charlie Curnow. But all in all, there is some real up and down nature with this scoring, as is to be expected. So, quite simply, Jezza, it's a thanks but no thanks. Charlie Curnow, very similar mould. It's a thanks but no thanks. Where do I see these guys averaging? Probably anywhere from 85 to early 90s. I mean, if they have a career best year, as we know, we've seen Curnow average, was it 97 that year? So, of course we know. And we've seen it with Jesse Hogan as well. You can have years as a key forward where you go off, but there's not many key forwards that I've considered over the years. And Jezza and Curnow, they're good options. And they're options that we looked at last year because there wasn't much else to look at. They had us grasping for all types. But I'm looking at our forward line this year, and I actually think there's quite a bit to like. So more than happy in this instance to just pass on them. Caleb Daniel, he's one of these guys that, clearly in a price tag point of view, isn't a premium, but he's in the premium discussion. I think he's going to come back to his absolute best. Now, Caleb Daniel, we all know the story. Great halfback flanker. Beautiful ball user. Just hits off those 20, 25 metre kicks all day long. Just a smart player. But Luke Beveridge has had his way with him, and he's gotten out of favour, and it's pretty hard to get back into favour once Bevo's done with you. I mean, look at those numbers. Fantastic run of years. I mean, we'd take any of those. Even 22, which wasn't his best. Gee, we'd take that this year. But last year, it just fell apart. I'm not exactly sure why. Obviously, preferred different options and was played in different roles, hence he's available as a forward. But the word is he's going to North Melbourne and he's going to play on a halfback flank. So that has been a happy hunting ground for us in SuperCoach. I mean, you think back to more recently Colby McCurcher and Harry Sheasel, but even you look at Jack Zeeble, Zach Fisher, Aaron Hall, like the list goes on of halfback flankers at North Melbourne that have treated us so well. For me, it's an absolute no-brainer of a selection. I think we all agree on that. I think he's one of the biggest locks in the game. But I'm chucking him up to the 95 to 99. I think he'll definitely average about mid-90s, and I think he'll be a keeper. So for me, it's as simple as he gets his roll back that he loves. He's going to be clearly the best kick behind the ball because McCurcher's playing midfield at the moment. He'll certainly be a great option coming out of defence. And North Melbourne at times have had Fisher and McCurcher, or Fisher and Sheasel, like different types. They're happy to share the ball around in the defensive 50. So that's where I'm placing him, 95 to 99. He's going to be one of the best picks this year, and I'm looking forward to having him on board. Brent Daniels, it's a no from me. One of those guys when you're scrolling through and you're like, oh, did he average 90? Righto. You know, I was looking at it, I was like, what? There he is. You know, number 6 on average. Number 6. Averaged 90 last year. Who would have known? You could have fooled me. Like, I had no idea that he averaged around that. He is a creative player. And look, it's not to say these guys in the thanks, but no thanks. It's not to say that they won't average in the 90s. It's just to say that whether it's for the position, the injury concerns, I'm just not interested. So personally, I think Daniels will average the least of these three. I think he'll probably average somewhere in the mid to high 80s. But definitely not one I've considered, and I'd be surprised if many do. But let me know if you're picking him. Sam Darcy is next up, and he's a guy on the rise, but gee, you'd have some guts to pick him. You really would. Not only is he a young man, but he's a young, tall man with plenty of development to come. He showed plenty, but he is still going to be the second man behind Tim English, and I just can't see us picking him. I know he kicked 7. Against the Roos, but in and around that, he had some consistent scores between 80 and 100, but more or less was below 100 with the occasional 50, the occasional 40. Yes, we'll see improvement, but for me, there's absolutely no need to pick him. I think we'll see an average. I think we'll see an improved average. So last year was about 79. I think we'll see him improve that anywhere from 5 to 10 points if he really establishes himself. Because he could establish himself as one of the best key forward backup rucks in the game, which there's a lot of points on offer. If I had to guess, I feel like he'll average around that, 87, 88 mark. But yeah, not for me. I think we talk about risk versus reward. There's a lot more risk with that selection, if you ask me, than the reward, because he's not exactly cheap. So happy to pass on him. Jesse Hogan, just rinsing and repeating the same conversation we've had with the key talls. A great year, but like we touched on with Curnow and Cameron, key forwards can have great years, but they do have a big fluctuation in their scoring. Like we said, This year, Jesse Hogan was the guy, best key forward, averaged 92. Recently, a 75, an 84. It wasn't that long ago that Charlie Curnow had a Jesse Hogan-style year. And, of course, naturally, when they're up there in the scoring, 97, of course we think about picking him. But he backs it up with an 82, an 86 prior to that. So there's big fluctuations with our best key forwards. I mean, Hogan could average in the 90s, yeah, don't get me wrong. Anywhere from the mid to high 80s to the early 90s. But he's not one that I'm going to pick. So might be a nice pick for your draft, but not for me in Classic. Luke Jackson. Oh, gee. He was a guy that just killed me last year. Absolutely killed me. And again, it just depends on... it's less about Jackson and more about Sean Darcy. It's just such a strange setup. I mean, Jackson just seems to be crying out to be the number one ruck. And until Darcy either gets long-term injury or retires, it's not going to happen. Like, he averaged 94. It's a pretty good year, but a lot of that was when Darcy wasn't playing. Like, we saw Sean Darcy miss chunks of footy, which he probably will do again. But it's not a way that we want to really approach it with hoping someone gets injured. I mean, look at this. So Darcy comes back round 6. So leading up to round 6, he's going okay. Probably didn't do as... Like, some of those early ones were fantastic. I'm guessing round 10, Darcy wasn't in there. No. And the back end of the year, 22 to 23. So he didn't even bounce back strongly there. So he's an interesting one. I'm going to place him in the 90 to 94. I think there will be enough times where Darcy is injured or they do share the ruck a fair bit. And he's a very talented player. And I think he's good enough to still average in the 90s, even sharing it. But if Darcy went down and did his knee, I'd be putting him up to here. I think it's a 3-figure average. If Luke Jackson's number one ruck for the whole year, it's huge. He could be All-Australian. But for what we know right now, he's in that category. So it is a bit of a tough one because he was a guy that I went for a bit of flexibility last year, that ruck forward swing ability, which at times was helpful, but more or less it was frustrating. So I'm happy to steer clear from him now, and like I've said with others, forward line was a different beast last year. There's no need to stretch too far this time around. We've got options, and Jackson isn't one that I've seen many consider at all, so happy to pass on him. Jason Horne-Francis. Now, he's available as a forward, as is very clear because he's in the forward premiums video, but he was a guy I was going to pick anyway. Even as a midfielder, I was sensing a big breakout. One of those, a bit of a Harry Sheezel style breakout. We get that mini breakout to the high 90s, and then he could be anything next year. I don't think he's going to average 118 or whatever it was like Sheezel did, but I've got him up in the 105 to 109 category, and I'm pretty confident with that. Like, I think the over and under is 108. I think it's about 50-50 whether he goes above or under that. I think last year we were talking about Butters and Rosie. I think now it's Butters and Horne-Francis. I think Rosie's still a very good player, but I think Horne-Francis will overtake Rosie as their second best and most important mid. And I think he's a different type of midfielder to Butters. I think he's got that, I guess, ruthlessness and brutality about him that can just crunch his way out of packs and almost physically hurt your team, as well as with the possessions. You know, Butters will almost cut you to pieces with his deft touches and creativity, where Horne-Francis will just go straight through you and let you know about it. So, yeah, he's an absolute lock. I've seen him in a lot of teams. I expect him to be in plenty. So, he's a gun. Then we've got Jack McCrae, who, of course, finds himself at the Saints. Found him tough to place as well because we've got him coming across to a St Kilda side that needs experience and class through the middle, but he is 30, and they do have a few guys through that midfield already. So I don't think we'll necessarily just see him go straight back to averaging 3 figures because he just all of a sudden gets opportunity. I mean, like Caleb Daniel, he fell out of favour with Bevo, so he'll get more opportunity at St Kilda. No doubt about it, but I don't think it's as simple as being like, he comes to the club and he's their top 3 mids and he's just in the centre bounce all the time. I still think they'll have Steele in their heaps. They'll prioritise the likes of Windhager and Philippou, and does Sinclair get some time in there? Does Wanganeen Miller get time in there? Where's Hunter Clark fit in? Finished the year really well. They like Paddy Dow. They seem to want to give him a go. So there's a bit to talk about, not to mention some other young guys that I'm sure they've drafted or are on the rise. So I'm going to place him in the early 90s for me. I think he'll be early 90s. I think if everything just fell in his lap and he just went back to his accumulating best, maybe mid-90s, but I think if we're talking over and unders, it's probably 91 for me. I feel like my expectation on McCrae would be high 80s to early 90s. So I'm not as bullish on him as I was Caleb Daniel. At the Dogs, when he was averaging 110 plus, he was just one of the main guys in there. I don't see him being that at St Kilda. I think we'll see him on the half-forward flank at times and pushing up to the stoppage, but I still think he'll be, important for them and important for our sides. And he'll make plenty of cash, Of course, whether he's a keeper or not, we'll wait and see, but he's an absolute bargain at this price. Harry McCae, rinse and repeat the conversation about key forwards. We've had it a couple of times. Sorry, Harry, on the picture there. I've cut half your face off. Dylan Moore. He's an interesting one, isn't he? Because he's probably a guy that, again, I'm not seeing many talk about him, but he's a very classy player and just a real footballer's footballer. One of those guys that's just reliable, does the right thing. He's not flashy, but he's consistent. He just hits the scoreboard as well. So you've got to respect the 3 years of football that he's put in. Very consistent. I'm going to place him in the 90 to 94. Had a ripper year this year, averaging 97. There's no rhyme or reason as to why I think he'll drop off. I just think he's probably a mid-90s guy. He's probably touch and go around which bracket he falls into. But I'm just going to have him in that one. I think, if you said, Shorty, what's he going to average? I'd say it'd be about 94 or 95. That'd be my prediction. So, he's right on that bracket there. Just does all the right things. And Hawthorn do have a lot of players that run through that midfield now. There was a time where he was getting some good midfield minutes. That's not so much the case anymore. He does chime in a little bit, but I reckon he burst onto the scene in one of these years and had a bit of midfield time. No, it wasn't that one. Maybe it was 22. I remember there was a run where he looked like he was going to be a midfielder. Unless I'm making it up. No, here we go. That run here, back in 22, really established himself big time. But he has sort of found himself more as that half-forward flanker type who works his way up, gets involved in linking plays and score involvements type of guy. So, good player. Not one I've considered, but a very good player. Isaac Ranken, and these last two in particular I've strongly considered. Ranken, for me, goes into this bracket, and he is just all class. My concern with him is the body and the split between the mid and forward. How's that look? Because we've seen Adelaide recruit, well, certainly Peatling, and there is a bit of a reshaping, restructure with their midfield, so I'll be interested to see how he does fit into it. But you'd think he just rolls in there because Adelaide looked their most dangerous. When he had these big scores and these high possession counts, he still hits the scoreboard even as a midfielder. He offered something different to Dawson and Laird and even Saligo, like Crouch. He offers breakaway, brash speed. I'll take you on, I'll look at you and I'll run past you. So I think their best football will be when Rankin is having 25 and kicking 2. So I'd like to think he still gets opportunity, but he does miss games, like consistently. 18, 20, 15. So he misses games of footy. Not necessarily big chunks, but there is always a little injury or a little suspension. So that's my only concern about picking him. He's been high on my radar, but I think the scoring's a lock, but he's just been on my radar about his reliability, I guess. Bailey Smith, such an easy one for me. I thought a little bit thought of me here, but I was like, nah, 100 to 104. As long as he bounces back from a long layoff of footy, because he has missed a lot of time, the opportunities will just be plentiful for him. I mean, we've seen this guy average good numbers as a dog and not get insane midfield time. I mean, he's averaged 99 before, hasn't he? 98, even a 92. So let's look at 22. I'm gonna say nothing like 70% centre bounce. I'll be thinking like 50 odd. Bailey Smith. 2022. Yeah, 54. So he was a key player to their midfield setup, but behind Bont, behind McCrae, and behind Liberatore. So he's been fourth in line for some time. Still managed to average some good numbers because he does find space very easily. He's that link-up play, inside and outside. He comes to the Cats, and it'll be the number 2, maybe number 3. I think Dangerfield probably takes a slight backward step to Holmes and Smith. I think it's their midfield now. So as long as he's fully fit and there's no little lingering issues or concerns with the body, he's ready to rock and roll. So I think he'll average early hundreds, and clearly at that price he's an absolute lock. But I think he's a guy we'll keep all year. So would love to hear your thoughts on how that's all sort of set up. We've really worked in from a bit of a staircase going on here, but that's how I've seen it in terms of grading these players and where I think our forward premiums will land in their average at the end of the year. Funny how, let's see how this ages. Be interesting to look back. But yeah, there's certainly plenty to think about for our forward line and a lot to like. Certainly don't need to gravitate to too many key forwards, but there is a stack of midfielders and guys rolling off half back as well that can certainly get us excited. So again, let me know your thoughts. Have a great start to the year, and I'll be back soon with another video. Cheers.